So, how long is this story? You ever find yourself in that situation where you're wondering how much longer is this going to last? And your brain starts to wonder because the person telling you this has told you a whole bunch of details but didn't really help your imagination, and your brain's working overtime to keep up with where they're at, what color was at, and you're just kind of lost. And you're just sitting there thinking, I hope this ends soon. Well, that kind of happened to me once. I actually felt sorry for the guy telling the story. What was really bad was it was at a storytelling event, and he'd gone way past his 8 minutes, and the little timer guy was kind of making all kinds of, hey, hurry up, finish, kind of get prompts to get him to quit. And he never told this story before, so we had no idea how long it is. You see, that's why we practice. That's why you want to know, how long is my story? How long should a story be? That's a good question. Well, if you're going to tell at a storytelling event, like, for instance, the moth storytelling. If you're familiar with that, it's a event that you can find online, and it's probably something good to check out. They're good storytellers. The best way to learn is to learn from those that do it good. So these folks, they have a 5-minute limit on their stories. You may think, man, 5 minutes isn't much. Well, 5 minutes is quite a bit of time. You ever just try to sit in silence for 5 minutes with a timer on and not do anything? For most of us, especially us Americans, that's kind of hard to do. I mean, no phone, nothing. Just 5 minutes of just sitting still. It's hard to do. Well, if you're like me with ADHD and someone's telling a story and you're not into it anymore, that's kind of what it turns into. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen to you. Well, it happened to me, so it might. But here's the thing, that's why we practice. Now, for story length, like I said, that moth is 5 minutes. The storytelling events I've been to, they were 7 minutes and 8 minutes, depending on who's leading it and what they're doing. So how do you make your story fit? Well, it's actually easier than you think. If you've recorded your practice story, your baseline story, and you've watched it a few times, you have a time there already. And you already know if I delete my ums and ahs and maybes and the amount of time I stared at the ceiling thinking about what to say next, you could probably shorten it down several minutes. Oh, and then there's this. Sometimes when we're telling a story for the first time, we start to remember extra details. So we start poking them in to fill up the holes, because as we tell it, it's like our brain's going, yes, and this happened, and then this, and then this. But is that really part of the story? Might be. But here's the thing. You get to watch your practice video and figure out what's important and what is just secondary details that may not matter. I remember long ago when I was studying stuff that this old guy said you should know 150% so you can share 100. And I thought that was kind of a weird thing to say, but in reality, it really is. You should be over-prepared before you do any kind of public speaking, even storytelling, because it's good to know extra details about your story. You don't need to share them, but what that does, it triggers your imagination to think about, oh, yeah, it gives more life to the story in your part, which comes out in your emotions and your facial expressions and just thinking about the story yourself. The people can hear in your voice that this was important to you. This was a big event. Hey, another thing here, I have notes. Attention spans. Our culture is a culture of very short attention spans. Thank you. Yeah, social media. But it's okay. We can fit into those attention spans. And we'll talk about that later as I'm learning things like what's your hook to get people to pay attention to you, because most folks don't have that much of attention span anymore. Even in church, they figured out now 28 minutes, about the max you can go, and then people drift off. That's just studies that prove that. Kind of sad. But our attention spans are getting shorter because we don't tell stories anymore. And even if we did tell stories, they would be more concise and probably not really long unless they're really good. Now, if you want to tell a long story, well, that's what books are for, or chapters. Tell your story in chapters if you want to, especially if you're recording stories for your family, for legacy videos. Sometimes it may be a chapter about our trip to Yellowstone. And maybe there's 5 or 6 stories in there to tell. You know, there's a story about the bear, the buffalo, you know, grandma put her coat too close to the fire to dry it out and it caught fire. And well, those kind of things, you know, stories within the stories. So in the story you're telling, think about it. Do I have stories within my story that I could pull out or not elaborate on so much, or stop and just say, but that's another story? That's a good one to use. I've used that before. Another thing here is, tell more shorter stories. I found that to happen too. I had some stories that were part of a bigger event. Because I recorded the event in my little journal and started to tell the story of the event without realizing there were several stories involved in that event, then in that memory. And when I broke them up into small stories, I was able to give more detail to them, and they were actually pretty good stories. So try that. Look at what you're talking about, and maybe there's a story within the story that you could take out. Another thing, this is from this storyteller guy. His name is Matthew Dix. You should watch his videos online, or if you can, get his book. It's called Storyworthy. Good book for storytellers, especially just personal storytellers. One of the things he said is don't over-describe your non-participatory people. That means like the background people. If grandma's not the main subject of the story, you don't need to describe grandma's dress or what her hair looked like that day. Or maybe you don't need to describe the obvious stuff like, I don't know what to say, the carrots are orange or the leaves were extremely green that day. All those extra words take up extra oxygen, and that burns up time. And we don't need those. I think the way it was said, the way this Matthew Dix guy said, is don't overwork your listener. Don't cause them to have to work too much. You're giving them too many details, and they have to apply those to people in your story that the story's not about. They're just they're the background. You don't need to get into deep detail on the background. Go, what do they call it now? Bokeh or something, when your background's, or portrait mode. Sometimes you need to tell your story in portrait mode and let the background be fuzzy. If you don't know what that is, I think on iPhones they have that now. It says portrait mode. Yeah, just turn it on and turn your camera around. You'll notice it gives you a real shallow depth of field. That's what we called it in real photography. Anyhow, fuzz some of that out. You don't need those details. What you need in detail is a subject, the challenge, whatever that may be in the story, and you can not describe or get in detail about the others. But once again, know 150, share 100. Hey, what else we have here? Yeah, don't make your listeners have to work or overload their imagination. Oh, another thing, what's the age of your listeners? Who are you telling this story to? Now, if you're at the local senior center, 5 to 8 minutes is probably pretty good. Now, if you're at your kids' or grandkids' elementary school and you're telling stories and they're laughing and giggling, well, you got to stop and let them have their fun time like that. And maybe your story might go 10, 15 minutes. Sometimes maybe you do that on a regular basis and you've worked your stories out to be that length, whatever their designated time should be for that activity. That's great too. But story length is an important thing to consider. And it helps me to be more concise in the story I'm telling. It helps me to put more thought and more work into the actual focus of this story. And in the next video, we'll look at what's called, or what I call, your point of view. How do you look at your story? What's the angle you see it from? But I've gone long enough. That'll be next time. Stop recording.